Good morning. I've decided to use my bit of time to highlight a couple of my experiences as part of the gay community from the perspectives of gratitude and regret. I am grateful that I am able to be here at this time and in this place, speaking openly about who I am and my life experiences, that I am welcomed and celebrated here. I regret that this wouldn't have been possible just 30 years ago. I was 50 years old when CCSM voted against becoming an open and affirming congregation. I am grateful that in the early 2000s, CCSM did vote to become open and affirming. It is a reflection of the people who were willing to do the hard work of looking at themselves, their values, and what they wanted this church to stand for. I regret that there are still many people in many churches and some denominations who have not been willing to do this work. It is the reason that Christianity is often viewed negatively in the gay community. A friend told me not too many years ago that it was easier to come out as a lesbian than as a Christian. Up until 1974, the American Psychiatric Association classified homosexuality as a mental disorder. They then changed the definition to a sexual orientation disturbance. It stayed that way until 1987. So for the first 44 years of my life, I was either disordered or disturbed. Yikes, I thought I was pretty good shape. I am grateful that I had the greatest woman who has ever lived as my mother. I came out to her in 1962 after a quick trip to the gynecologist to make it sure it wasn't just a minor plumbing malfunction. She went to the community hospital here in San Mateo and spoke to someone in mental health. Clearly a man ahead of his time, he told her, "Your daughter has accepted who she is, now you have to." From that day forward, I have never received anything but unconditional love and support from everyone in my family. I regret that for many of my gay brothers and sisters, this was and still is not the case. Many were rejected by their families, dishonorably discharged from the armed services, lost jobs and housing. Some entered convenient but unhappy marriages or endured dangerous therapies. Many have been assaulted and killed, and many took their own lives. I am grateful for the people who had the courage and conviction to lead us out of the closet. People like Harvey Milk, Sally Gearhart, Franklin Cavaney, Phyllis Lyon, and Del Martin. I regret that I wasn't one of them. At times, I avoided certain conversations, gave evasive answers, and even lied. Proposition 6, the Briggs Initiative, was a measure on the California ballot in 1978 that would have banned gay people from teaching or working in public schools. Anita Bryant was its public spokesperson. I regret that I didn't have the courage to speak out against it to my colleagues at the school that I had been teaching at for 12 years. I am so grateful for the changes I have seen in my life. I worry about some of the things we are witnessing today in terms of anti-gay legislation, particularly against our trans brothers and sisters. I hope that as progressive Christians, we don't find ourselves looking back with regret for what we didn't do. We have come a long way, but there's always more work to be done.
For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. It's fitting that we started this morning with the Marty Haugen, because I often start my own testimony with my origins, which are that 61 years ago, on Reformation Day, I was born in the Lutheran hospital. Now, thankfully, my mother avoided what the chaplain wanted, which was to name me Martin Luther Ruthroff, which she thought was a little much, little much. And we skipped that out. We skipped over that. And for those that don't know, Reformation Day is the day that Martin Luther nailed his 99 Theses on the door in the church at Wittenberg. And he chose that day, a day that we now know as the Eve of All Hallows, or Halloween, because it was the day before All Saints' Day, and he knew everyone would be in the Catholic Church for All Saints' Day. So he chose that day very purposely. Yes, I was born on Halloween. I'm the third of three, 10 years to my closest sibling. My sister Sally was 10 when I was born, and my brother was 13. And I was my mother's little pumpkin till the day she died at 95. So I have a long history around being a Lutheran. Raised in a Lutheran church, and I was baptized in the church that my mother was raised in Hollywood, California. I'm a second generation Californian, which at my age is a pretty rare thing. Mom was born in the 20s in Hollywood. She belonged to Hollywood Lutheran. And this is an eclectic congregation in the 60s when I was born. It's interesting that it was 1962 for you, Diane. That's the year I was born, of course. So you came out and I came in. But this was a very eclectic congregation. The tenor soloist in the congregation was gay. We had my shirt-tail aunts, who were really no relation other than we called them Auntie Nita and Aunt Nikki, were a lesbian couple who had ultimately a relationship of over 60 years. So very eclectic congregation. We had a transsexual couple in the congregation. This was a big deal in the 60s. And we even had a sexual scandal between a bisexual pastor and a gay congregant. So, you'd think that I was raised in a congregation that was open and affirming. But my real faith journey began with confirmation, which is, of course, the tradition in the Lutheran Church. And I had wonderful YMCA camp experience on Catalina Island, where my faith continued to grow. And I knew about this time, too, that I liked boys. Not just liked, but wanted to be with. I didn't understand it, but I knew it. And as I said, I'm the third of three, and my sister got married in 1973. We just were privileged to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary in April with them. And she and her husband, Carl, have always been an example of marriage and family to me. They had their first child when I was 14, spent a lot of time helping them, babysitting. I was, the right age to babysit, so I spent a lot of time babysitting. And by the time I was leaving high school, I knew that there were four things that were pretty clear to me. I knew that I loved God with all my heart. I knew that I'd be a fantastic dad. I had a great father, unfortunately killed just before my 18th birthday. I knew that music spoke to my soul, and I knew that I liked boys. And with all that was around me, one might expect that I would have come out at this point, or at least spoken to one of the many people from the LGBTQ community that were around me, including my dear aunts. But I rather chose to follow what I saw as society's prescription for my life in order to have a family. And so I embarked on an adventure to be straight, because in order to have the family that I wanted in the 1980s, that seemed the only path. And I also felt pressure put on by myself to live up to being the golden son of the family. So after college, I struggled through college with my sexuality. I still knew I liked boys. I tried to date girls. And after college, I joined the church that my sister and brother-in-law belonged to because I moved into the area not far from them. And I met a woman in the church choir, and everybody thought we were the golden couple, and so we got married. I often say we both were desperate to be married. She was 8 years my senior. She was, approaching her 30s, actually in her early 30s, so that clock was ticking for her, and I wanted a family, and so we got married. And we tried for 11 years to make it work. And I think, had it been a healthy relationship, it might have. I don't know. We'll never know, but it wasn't a healthy relationship for another number of other reasons. And at the end of that 11 years, as the marriage started to collapse, I began to revisit my sexuality and my faith. Because you see, in order to stay married, I had become very conservative in my religion. I hid in the belly of the beast, if you will, because it gave me no options. I had to be straight. God required me to be straight in the theology that I was following. And, I could probably make a life as that outward facade began to kind of decay and collapse. I knew times were different. Now it was the late 1990s. We'd made 10 years of advancement in LGBTQ rights. And so I began to study. I did a lot of study. Had the benefit of some great clergy who understood that, I don't think they would have called it a progressive Christianity at that point, but they understood that idea that the psalmist talks about, of it was you who formed me. That became the basis of how I brought my faith with me as I came out of the closet. I knew that if God had formed me to be who I was, that it was right, because in my mind, God doesn't make mistakes. And so the year 2000 saw many changes for me. I left Southern California and I moved up here to the Bay Area to take a new job. I started singing in a gay ensemble that was part of a bigger gay and lesbian choral movement. I went to my first choral festival called Gala. It happened to be here in San Jose. And I lived just in Oakland, so it was convenient. And, my friends at the time, as I was starting to form a whole new friend group, often told me that, Don, you came out with a vengeance. And yeah, I think that was probably pretty accurate. I came out of the closet pretty fast, and I've never once looked back. So I was attending a Lutheran church here in Oakland. My brother was the assistant to the bishop for congregational life and finance. Yeah, those Lutheran roots really run quite deep. And then on the 16th of September 2001, my faith took another turn. Yes, that was that Sunday following that horrible tragedy on Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. And that Sunday, my best friend wanted to go to church. And he and I, we lived together in San Francisco, and I said, well, do you want to go to Lutheran church with me? He was a good little Lutheran boy like I was, raised in Lutheran church, one of the things that formed our friendship. And he said, no, I want to go to MCC. And I kind of cringed inside and was like, oh dear, I don't know. They're going to be a liberal bunch of yahoos, all the things you think. And I walked into MCCSF, and preaching that Sunday was Penny Nixon. And my faith came home in that sermon. It found coexistence with my homosexuality in a way that it had never before. I heard a gospel that was incongruous with what I had learned throughout my formative years, but was a deeper understanding of that same faith. A gospel that completed my journey to embracing my faith and not wrestling with it. Jeremiah 29:11, one of my favorite verses, says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans for a future and a hope." Today I'm married to Jonathan, an Irish Jew. You can take that up with him. I'm blessed to not only celebrate my Christian traditions, but I also get to share his Jewish traditions as well. His family is so important to me. I was very lucky, as Diane was, when I actually came out in 1999, 2000. My family embraced me. Nobody has ever said to me, I'm not surprised, but they've all been just very accepting. And Jonathan's family has done the same. We've been blessed to share Passover together. We share Rosh Hashanah together as a family. And just this past week, we were in Jerusalem for a family wedding. So I have truly been blessed to be embraced by his family as well as him being embraced by my own. My mom, before she died, I'm so thankful that she got to meet Jonathan, and she had several years of getting to know him, and he, much like my brother-in-law, became the favorite. I told my brother-in-law, Carl, you have competition with in Barbara's eyes. She likes Jonathan as much or maybe a little bit more than she likes you. So I'll close with this. The senior pastor of the congregation that I served in the 1990s preached a sermon once about not putting God in a box. He, and I'm paraphrasing, talked about how we should never limit God's power in our lives by constraining God's love for us and for others. When I filed for divorce and came out, Pastor Brodowski called me into his office. Now, it was interesting to me because he called me into his office fully knowing everything that Kathy and I were going through, fully knowing all the problems, everything behind the scenes. And he called me into his office not to convince me not to divorce Kathy, even though we had a beautiful daughter, Katie, that we loved. No, he called me into his office to actually convince me to go to reparative therapy so that I could pray away the gay. And I let him speak his piece. And when he was done, I looked at him and I said, "John, you once preached a sermon that said not to put God in a box." I said, "Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put God in a box anymore. God's created me as a gay man, and I'm going to live my life the way God created me so that he can work through me in any way that they choose." I walked out and I never spoke to him again. My faith journey has been deep to this point, and I expect that it will continue from now to the end of my days. It is thanks to finding progressive Christianity in churches like CCSM that I can live out that faith and grow in it. And I pray that we can continue to be a shining light of progressive Christianity that will give our children room to be who God created them to be.
My name is Max Nayak. I'm 17 years old and have been attending CCSM for about 13 years. Growing up, I didn't know what LGBTQ+ was. I didn't even know a community like it existed. I first found out about it when I was 12, when I attended a week-long sleepaway church camp called Camp Cazadero. Up until then, despite growing up in this church surrounded by people of all different backgrounds, I had no idea that being queer was allowed or even a thing. The night I came home from camp, I went and I told my mom, "Mom, I'm bisexual," and then proceeded to explain what it was and how I learned about it and why I knew it was me. I was adamant that this is who I am and refused to accept that my label could change. Naturally, my mom questioned this and proceeded to tell me that I was still young and had time to figure that stuff out, and that my identity might change, but that she loved me no matter who I was. I will never admit that she was right, but she was right. Throughout the following years, I switched through all of the labels you could ever think of, never finding one that truly fit who I was. Growing up has been rough, as it is for every teenager, and there's always felt a looming pressure to label myself. Most of this pressure came from myself and from my middle school peers. I went to a very small public K-8 school, with my entire middle school being less than 100 kids. During our sex ed, we learned all about heterosexual relationships and were given a diagram of a unicorn as our LGBTQ sex ed. And that was the extent of my knowledge. When the world shut down due to COVID, it left everybody with a lot of alone time. And I'm pretty sure I changed my label at least every week, if not more. I put so much pressure on myself trying to figure out exactly who I was that I just labeled myself as gay. I felt that at 14 years old, I was supposed to know who I was and that that was what I was going to be for the rest of my life. As I got older, I realized that labels aren't necessary. I stopped feeling the pressure of coming out to people because I didn't feel that I owed someone a label. I felt that I should be accepted no matter who I was. I've always been very open about my sexuality because growing up, I didn't have anybody specifically telling me that there were more options than being gay or straight. I've always been very proud of my identity, and although I have experienced some homophobia, I've never felt that being queer was something to be ashamed about. And for that, I am incredibly lucky. Celebrating LGBTQ pride is just as important as celebrating Black history, uplifting women, and bringing awareness to mental health. The world is really scary right now, and our rights are still being taken away every day, even though we're in the 21st century. By doing our part in celebrating pride throughout the year, not just during June, we are fighting for equality. We are fighting to become a free people.
Okay. First of all, don't you feel good about our future? I mean, amazing. So today is our 15th wedding anniversary. So it is our 15th legal wedding anniversary. We had it at City Hall. And our son, Calvin, was 4 years old at the time and was our ring bearer. It was 3 days after my mother's 81st birthday and 5 months before she passed away. I'm so thankful that she was still on this earth when we had the right to marry and that it became a reality for me. With all of that, even with all of that, Margie and I consider that wedding our legal wedding, but not our real wedding. We had our real wedding just over 20 years ago, March 22nd, 2003. We picked that date partially because for people like us, simpletons, it's a really easy date to remember, 03/22/03. It also happened to be one day after the Iraq War started. The wedding was at the faculty club at Cal, go Bears. We wore long, very fancy black dresses and had about 150 people there. It was in most senses traditional. Our parents walked us down the aisle to Pachelbel's Canon in D. We had a ceremony that included readings, the song Grow Old With Me, and poetry and a blessing. Afterward, we had toasts and dinner and a first dance to Ella Fitzgerald singing Love Is Here to Stay. That was topped off with dancing until midnight. It was a glorious and blessed event. We went to Italy for our honeymoon, and less than a year later, we were at California Pacific Medical Center in San Francisco, giving birth to our son, Calvin. Traditional, real, but not recognized by the state.
I'll
just start off by saying I hate to tell this story. So this is where our real wedding, traditional wedding, just wasn't enough. After a flawless 8.5 months of pregnancy, Austin experienced a complication called the HELP syndrome. She was in the hospital for 3 days before they decided to induce labor. As a part of this, they wanted her well rested. So irony of all ironies, they gave her morphine. You're not even allowed to have Advil during a pregnancy, but you can have morphine right before you give birth. This worked very poorly with the heart condition of Austin's, and her heart slowed to a low of 8 beats per minute. Calvin's heart rate increased commensurately to over 220 beats per minute. I heard the nurses calling a code, and the crash cart equipment started to enter the room. A nurse pulled me aside and asked if I was Austin's legal next of kin. I was not. Austin's mom was driving up Highway 5 from Southern California and could not be reached. The nurse explained to me that a decision may have to be made regarding the viability of the mother or the baby. I'll never forget that word, viability. She went on to say that it could not be my decision as I had no legal standing. I was neither the legal parent nor the legal spouse. Then we all sat and waited. I'd like to say that I prayed, but I was numb. I wasn't thinking at all. I have no idea how long we sat. The nurse was sitting right next to me. The doctors were on standby. We were all watching the monitor, 2 monitors. It was the longest period of my life. I have no idea if it was minutes or hours or, I have no idea. But then Austin's heart started to speed up and Cal's heart rate started to come down. We don't know why. And most of you know the story from there. I went on to adopt Cal when he was 4 months old. It appeared that this early trauma did not stunt his growth. And we've lived a largely charmed life since then. But the over 1,000 legal protections afforded the legally married were not available to us in our time of need, and in my time of need. I knew my entire life that I would be a mother, and I think that's what sustained me more than anything. We became as vociferous in our quest for marriage equality as 2 moms raising a newborn could be, and we joyously married in City Hall 15 years ago today.
So I just wanted to say that when rights are being taken away from people or not given to all, or taken away from people in any state in our country, please stand up and fight. It may not be your rights, it may not be in California, but it's probably someone's rights who you know, you may care about, might even love. So I just want to say, we are so thankful we found CCSM, where our son could be baptized in front of many of you, and you all welcomed us here with open arms, which helped in our healing from that situation. You all have meant so much to us and to our whole family, and in so many ways. You may never know how you have impacted us. So thank you for being part of our story. We really love you guys. Thank you.